So I think we're ready to move forward to Article 30, Healthy Buses for Students. And Brian Folds, I believe, is already joined to the meeting. So he was. There he is. Okay.
How does that work?
That looks peachy.
Great. All right. On my end, I don't see my slides in the Zoom, but I do see them on my screen. Are you seeing the slides?
Yes, we are.
Great.
Just introduce yourself, Brian. That would be helpful, just so we all get the formal thing.
Yeah, Brian Folds, citizen petitioner for Article 30, which is Healthy School Buses, 33 Riverdale Road here in Concord. And is there anything else I need to divulge?
That's perfect.
Oh, good. All right. So I have a lot of slides and they have a lot of stuff on them, but this is my one time to explain my article. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, and I'm willing to go back to any slide to answer questions, but I think it would be good to see all the slides and then get a quick 2-3 sentences on each, and then go back and answer questions.
Okay.
Let me make sure I got my machine going. Here is the article. It's requesting $200,000. Where that money comes from, I left up to the finance director to decide. I used her language so that she would have the flexibility. I've worked on many committees. I wanted to put a little something about me and what I've been doing in town, and give you a little table of contents of all these slides. So the history of this program goes back to when they first proposed a new high school. When that proposal was made, someone in the audience of town meeting asked where the bus depot was in the new plans, and the school committee said that they were considering outsourcing busing. There was a movement to save our bus drivers. And then there was land acquisition of W.R. Grace, which led to a delay in buying buses for a while that had schools coming back for 10 diesel buses at once. During that town meeting, there was a request for the schools to create a committee to look into alternatives to diesel. I'll have a slide about that. That committee found a grant program that we took advantage of, and we kind of made a plan to do an 80% electric fleet whenever financially feasible. And the next slide is that committee that was formed. This is a quick synopsis of what they were challenged with. It looked at diesel, it looked at biodiesel, it looked at propane, it looked at CNG, it looked at electric, all the different options that could drive a bus and get students to and from school, what the infrastructure was, what the fueling was, what the maintenance was, and which one of those choices would be the best one overall. And there's a link to their presentation. The conclusion was electric was great in every category except one, which was first purchase price. It is quite high. It's about 3.5 times the first purchase price of a diesel, but the life cycle is lower if there's incentives. And I'll get to that at the end. And here's the pilot we were able to take advantage of and get one of these buses. The bus and the charger were of no cost to the town. The installation of that charger was a cost to the town, but net it was cheaper than doing a diesel. So we participated in the pilot and we learned quite a lot. There's a wonderful video that's linked here on this slide that I highly suggest people go watch. I wanted to talk about the health effects of combustion engines. COVID, which my other article was presented in February, on a warm day in February. It was 70 degrees in mid-February. Here we are with the heat waves in the summer. This is due to human action. This is what we emit from our tailpipes. You can see in these pictures the difference in visibility in these pictures side by side when we did the lockdown and when we didn't. And also in these satellite photos from NASA, which shows NO2 emissions, which is coming from the diesel engines. you can see the massive decrease as we took the cars off the road. This improves health outcomes. And these are the health effects of diesel. I showed this in my other slide, so in order to save time, I'll keep going. I also showed this slide. This is the effects of climate change. Climate change isn't related to a specific event. It's a threat multiplier, as the military describes it. It enhances bad things, whether it's, heat strokes, heart attacks, lung problems, whether it's flooding events, ticks, insects, crop failure. That's what climate change does. It's a long-term trend. So what is climate change? It is essentially a chemistry problem. It is if we stop taking things from the ground and putting them in aerosol into the air that reflect light and keep the infrared wavelengths of light heating up the planet, we solve all these problems. So we just simply have to stop digging it up. And here's the town strategy for the town to reduce. If we have a supply of clean electricity and we fuel switch how we heat our homes and we drive our cars, it is a massive reduction in the amount of these gases that we're putting in the air that heat the planet. That scenario is that 60% reduction, whereas we spent the last 8 years between 2008 and 2016 and only accomplished 6% reduction. So it's a very good solution, and we have many reports from the town that say that. Specifically to the school bus fleet, this was part of that analysis of those, the busing fleet. You can see that in certain years, we're burning 100,000 gallons of diesel to drive these buses around our town. And you think of 100,000 gallons of diesel, that's a lot. But then you add that to the oxygen needed for combustion, and it's almost 2 million pounds of greenhouse gases just from our bus fleet. And this is with 36 buses, and currently we're at 42. So our fleet is growing. And that's 8% of the municipal sector's greenhouse gas emissions. So addressing this one fleet can really help in this area. And I'll talk a little bit more about vehicle to grid, but this is a picture of our bus depot and our solar array from Concord Light. We have a great ability in town to capitalize on this kind of technology because we have our own electrical utility, a strong town manager focused form of government, and there's not a lot of barriers for us to do this adoption. We just have to show the will and show that it's financially feasible. So I wanted to put this in there because I had some geeks ask me about, well, how is a bus going to drive around all day and then discharge into the evening peak for electricity? So this is the example. Again, this is geeky and wonky, but I want to answer all questions. If you look at the chart, you'll see that the state of charge, that's how much energy is in the battery. Low at 2 a.m., it starts charging, gets full. 6 a.m., it starts driving. And then when it returns, it does a little charge and then discharges into that peak and saves us money. And on my next slide, I'm going to talk about the avoided cost. So when I say that this shedding of the evening peak will save us money, I'm talking about the Rns charges from the ISO. These are a per kilowatt fee that we pay based on our substation load through the light plant. If we reduce that load, we reduce this expense. Last year, this year, Article 17 says that we'll pay almost $4 million in this category. And we have each bus, each inverter, bidirectional inverter, will be able to put out 60 kilowatts. And the price for each of those is about $10. So each month, each bus with that inverter can save us $600 a month. And that's as long as, and the $10 that I'm multiplying by is forecasted to go up as we go, as you see there on that chart. And you can see the two charts I have up here On the right, one is load from 2008, the other is load from 2018. And the difference in that reduction is the solar adoption that has gone on in town. So that reduction during the day hours is primarily due to solar, but you can see that the effect of solar wears off towards where that little peak of the horse, so the head of the horse is there. That's where batteries come in and save us money. And that's because you can see the one below is how many times that hour of the day was our transmission peak. And this is an aggregate of 4 years. And you can see that it's around that 6 o'clock hour. So kids are off the bus is back in the depot at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and it can do these idle services while it sits there connected to the grid. So when there is no school, it's still doing work. It's still earning money by lowering our rates. And this is what happens during our solar saturation is the first graph. This is a Sunday when we have so much solar production in town that we have a low load issue rather than a peak load. And this allows us to absorb a lot of that excess energy without curtailment. And it basically, it allows us to put more renewables in town. The one to the right of it is where we're discharging into our ISO capacity hour. This is a 1 hour each year, which has a very high cost. And you can see that there's an orange line, and then there's 2 gray lines on either side. And that is, the orange is the average over 11 years, and the gray lines are the max and min for those hours over the 11 years. So that drop that you see, here, let me see if I can put this on the screen. Yeah, this drop is the solar saturation. And this hump right here, this is our peak. This is the one that can cost quite a lot of money. And if I go to my next slide, I can show you why. So this year, it's expected to be about $3 million for that expense. In previous years, that has been $180 per kilowatt. So times that by 4,850, and you get like $8 million in expense. So this is our peak, our demand during those peak hours. And you can see how when we added those solar arrays, our percentage of New England's peak has gone down. That's savings. And here you can see the days. This happens in the summer when the buses are sitting around doing nothing in the lot. So those batteries are fully available to take advantage of this. And here is the price of that per kilowatt over these different years. And the tricky thing about this is we don't know what the price will be when we're setting our load. So prices may look low in 2020 and 2023, but the price for 2024 is based on our load last year. They have to go through an auction process to set that rate. So it's always best for us to shed load during that New England peak. So what is it that I'm asking for in this article? There's 2 basic things I'm asking for this money. One, the majority of it is for this vehicle-to-grid infrastructure. The idea of digging a trench every time we buy a bus just seems like a waste of money to me. And that's where we're being led to by the process. So I'm here to ask outside the process as a petitioner, let's do the basic, put the pipes in the ground, the connection to the grid, so that we can capture those savings. And here's a total cost of ownership so that you can get a sense of why we need to capitalize now on that Volkswagen incentive. And we need to focus on, buying it with the incentives available and how that saves money. Whereas buying a bus, which was the original intent, there were some advocates in town, they wanted to make a mandate that we only buy electric buses for health reasons, but that is an additional expense. And back in 2016, we agreed that we would do this when the life cycle cost is lower than a diesel. So that's that green area here. So here's what a diesel will cost in these categories. Here is the cost if we have no funding or no incentive. If we get an incentive for one bus, it drops and the life cycle cost goes below that of a diesel. And this is just with those peak shavings. There's other ways we may be able to get money through the clean peak standard and other factors, but I don't know if we qualify for those, so I'm not going to put them into the table yet. But when I talk about the savings from those grid services, that's this $140,000 per bus. That's the vehicle to grid savings. And you can see how the cost over the life cycle of 12 years on a diesel compared to an electric with vehicle to grid is strikingly valuable to the town over that time period. But still persistent is that first purchase price. And so my article is asking for about 50,000 of that is to ensure that we can get two of those buses, which is my next slide, which is just the first slide was one bus purchased. This is two buses purchased because we want to maximize that Volkswagen funding. The Volkswagen funding will do 80%, but it's capped at $500,000. So we can capture $500,000 and we can do regular, just charging of the bus as a normal electric vehicle, no vehicle to grid, no grid services, and we'll still save money. We'll still save some money. If we do one bus that does vehicle to grid services and the other bus is chained onto that with a second dispenser here, then we get the value of grid services is reduced because only one bus will be doing the grid services, but we can still operate two. That sees more savings. That's still half price buses over the life cycle. And if we do two doing grid services, which are these inverters, some of the costs initially go up for infrastructure, but over the life cycle, it goes even lower. And the reason that I'm so much an advocate for this technology is really the carbon impact, because we're spitting out with just two buses over their life cycle. We can reduce that by 66%, 2/3 reduction in emissions. And it's the important emissions. This is the emissions that our kids are breathing. This is directly where they're driving these, 70 some odd miles a day through our community. So you and I and the kids are all breathing everything that comes out of that tailpipe. So, and it's financially, it's valuable, but we need basic infrastructure. So I made a summary slide that says, we've done electric buses. That's very rare. We know what we're doing. They're healthier for kids. The emissions reduction is huge. And with the incentive of Volkswagen, which is limited, it's financial savings over the duration of the bus. And so this is just a summary, but I do have some additional slides I'd like to skip through, and we can go back. They may answer some of your questions. So I wanted to call out a 7-year-old here in Concord. This just happened to come across Twitter. Eric's son, Tyler, was doing it himself. He's going into first grade. He put a solar panel on the back of his little electric, I forget what those are called, little 12-volt things that kids play with. But that actually is charging the vehicle. And I thought that was pretty cool. So this is to show why the schools need that additional 50 grand to avoid taking the hit with education services. So I'm going to take a second. If you do one school bus, clicked on it. If you do one school bus, the net first purchase cost is $73,000. Now these numbers are what we experienced in the first round of Volkswagen funding. So the schools had a choice to pay less for one electric as a first purchase, which they gladly did and applied and received funding from the state to do our second electric bus in town, but it's the only one in that round. Because if we do two of those buses, you can see how the per bus cost goes to $117 And that's $17,000 per bus above what they're budgeting, which is the 100,000. So I'm asking for up to 50,000 to cover that delta, so that the schools put in their budgeted 100,000 per bus, and this funding would cover that additional. In this calculation, it's like 34, but again, these numbers have changed. And then talking a little bit about the infrastructure, it's hard to compare diesel buses to electric buses when the electric buses require a charger. They require infrastructure to fuel them. But whenever we talk about the cost of diesel buses, the town had put in the fueling infrastructure for those buses. And that's the other part of what I'm asking for, is the basic infrastructure of conduit in the ground, service to the light plant. This was done in Beverly just recently, and the company that did it for the Beverly Bus Depot spent about $250,000 on this basic infrastructure. I'm asking for 150 because we don't need the same. We have our own utility, we have other ways, but we can do it for less. And that's a pretty good number for that infrastructure. And here's the details about what that infrastructure build is. We need to get specific plans, but it's basically, you can see this point is where the electrical service comes in from Concord Light into the depot building. It goes back out in an underground conduit and charges the existing electric bus. We need a new service connection here with multiple conduits running down to these machines along this row here where these buses park. And as we buy buses, we'll buy this unit and plug it in, but we need a concrete pad with the tubes and the bollards ready to go. And that's what this funding would pay for. And this is something I presented to the schools. We don't pay full price. We're always looking for an incentive to reduce that first purchase price. Add electric buses as soon as we can, whenever we can get that life cycle down below that of a diesel. And this has been an ongoing effort. And we're looking at multiple funding sources. We need buses that we can decommission in order to qualify for some of these. There's lots of terms and conditions in these grants or these funding opportunities. And if you want details on the buses themselves, that's the Thomas, the Bluebird, and the Lion. So a lot of slides, and I can go back to wherever you want, but this is my one time to explain all of this, so I apologize. It took a long time, but hopefully somebody learned something, and it was pretty good.
Thank you, Brian. Can we now go to the full display of all the members, and then we can see when folks are raising their hand and might want to have questions for you. Now, from the Finance Committee, any questions from the Finance Committee? We're going to go there first before we go to the audience. Greg.
Brian, real quickly, on one of the last slides, it looked like it said one of those chargers can charge 4 buses at max. You don't have to put the slide back up, but was that correct? And so we will only need 1 to start off with. So the 150 is mostly the conduit and putting the concrete pad in and getting the service there. Yes.
So let me see if I do want to go back to the slide. I don't know how to quickly do that. But yes, so there's a PCS, which is the inverter that changes the current from AC to DC. Oh, I just missed it. So this big box and this box here, they are.
I don't have the slide.
Oh, sorry, not sure.
My basic question is, so we could probably get four buses before we had to put more of these in. They're probably not that expensive, but it just caught my eye there.
Yeah. So no, it's a good question, and I did break down the costs for doing so. So yes, this system can do up to 2 dispensers. This one can do 4. And so we need at least one of these to start, and then we can connect more buses. The important thing is that if we look at this bus 2 model, you'll see here in the last 2 columns that vehicle to grid service. So if we do one big box or one of these PCSs, and then we put one dispenser, we can get this kind of value out of it. If we do one PCS and 2 dispensers, we can get half the grid service value out of it. And so but that's not what the 150,000 is what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for the 150,000 is a place to put these machines. It's the connection to the greater grid between the machine and Concord Light.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to stop sharing so you can see hands.
There we go. D.
Brian, I have several questions for you. I'm not sure what the sequence is going to be. It'll depend on how your answers go. One of the first questions I have for you is Article 31 will not be moved. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I spoke with the town manager, and we are going to do that report, so there's no need to debate that at town meeting.
Who is going to do the report?
The Director of Sustainability with input from the department heads.
And the department heads are just for the town or the town and the schools?
The town and the schools. Any town-owned vehicle, whoever operates the budget for that would participate in informing Kate about their process.
Okay, and when do you anticipate that will be finished?
When I can come up for air and help her out in getting that done.
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, it's Stephen. Do you want me to answer that, Brian?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we're not sure of the timeline. Actually, just today, you're all the first to find out. I did sign an application for grant funds to bring in a consultant to help us with the fleet analysis as well. So I don't know what the timeline on that is. Kate Hanley is expert in sustainability matters, but not necessarily an expert in fleets. And so hopefully we'll get the grant and we'll move forward as expeditiously as possible.
Okay, so that actually raises another question or two. In going through what I was able to find online about the VW program, I did come across the fact that we have already received $295,005.79 for one electric school bus and one charging station.
Correct. That's round 1. We only did one bus in round 1. I'm hoping to do, if this article passes, we will do 2 buses in round 2. If it does not,
stop right there, please.
Okay, sorry.
So round 1, I have not seen any information on round 2. Can you maybe tell me where I could find that information?
Yes. If you go to I can send you an email, but it's on the state website. They have not released the date of round 2. Mass DEP sets that schedule, and we have not heard.
Okay, because I went to the Volkswagen not their website, but our state website on it, and I haven't seen anything published since December of 2019. And I called today, and the people are working at home. So I was just concerned because I hadn't seen anything. And already having received funding in the first round, is that going to be separate funding in the second round?
Yes.
Another $500,000 will be available in the second round? Correct. Okay. And is that in the open solicitation program?
Correct.
Okay. So in the open solicitation, I would assume that you could have infrastructure, you could have school buses, you could also have transit buses.
You can't do infrastructure. You can do the vehicles and the chargers, but not the infrastructure.
The chargers, okay. You can do the chargers and the vehicles, but it could be both a school bus and it could be a town bus, right? A different
Yes.
vehicle.
It could.
Okay. So I guess part of my question is if there's a task force or a group that's working on an infrastructure for the town, it might be prudent to wait to see what vehicles would serve the best purposes before we just jump into buying another school bus or two.
So so you're right. This is buying a school bus is what we have on the table right now. The consultant this is the first I heard that we're going to be getting a consultant. The expectation was the second round applications were supposed to be due already. So because of COVID, they're delayed, like town meeting. So if there becomes a time where we have, because the town is limited to 500,000.
Correct.
So if there is a real opportunity for round two for a garbage truck or some other vehicle, that's a good reason. My point is we need to electrify all the town fleet. We can't financially, push these things forward unless they make, they pencil out. And if that means that we do one school bus and one garbage truck, that's how it works out. And then because it says up to, we don't use that money that gets set aside in the article.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that needs to go to the department that is buying that other bus or that other vehicle. I don't see that happening in round two. That may happen in round three after we have a report. So I fully expect, I'm surprised the applications aren't due for round two already. And I'm very concerned about waiting until the 13th to figure out if this article passes. But it's the way the schedules are working out. Does that answer your question fully?
It answers my question fully. Thank you very much. That question fully. I guess another question that I have is, you have answered the question. I still am concerned that about a school bus, purchasing a school bus, and you had in one of your slides, you just showed Bluebird, correct?
Yeah.
And Bluebird was not the bus that that we received in the past. Is that correct?
The pilot bus was a Lion, correct?
Right. And I know at at one of the meetings you had indicated that you might want to get a different bus or two. And in bringing on a different bus, you're also going to have mechanics become familiar with that bus as well. And
Yeah.
so I'm just looking at that as another issue. So do you want to have two like that? Do you want to just have one like that? One Bluebird bus so that you're able to work on that. Another thing would be,
So D,
is there currently capacity for charging two buses?
So I'll answer that question in a second, but as for the details on the bus, we have proposals from an RFP. These are 3 of those manufacturers. I got a ream of paper to go through on the details of each of those buses. As for doing a different brand of bus, that we're in early days. So the vehicle to grid performance of some of these may be better. The experience with the first bus may be helpful. Some of these may have drawbacks as how they have to be sheltered in cold climates. That's a no-go for us because we don't shelter our vehicles. So that's the discussions going on with the schools about which of these proposals to accept in round 1. And a lot of that has to do because there's other technical issues. So some of these vehicles do not have an AC inverter on the vehicle. They rely on that PCS. So if we don't if this doesn't pass, we can't buy certain brands of these buses because they don't have that onboard inverter, and we'll have to use the inverter, a slower charge over time through the building. That would skew us to buying a different bus. So
Yeah,
there's a lot
definitely.
there, and this article is keeping everything up in the air. And I really kind of want a decision so that we can take action and conclude. And
Oh, understandably, everybody wants decisions on the budget for the year we're already in. Another question I have is, the school has its own program and has its own plan for purchasing school buses, excuse me. And I'm just wondering why the schools are not presenting this article, or why the town is not presenting this article.
Well, I can't answer that question as the negative, but I can tell you the origin of this article. So there was a group in town that wanted to purchase healthy buses for our students as a mandate. We wouldn't be allowed, if this article that they proposed had gone through town meeting and passed, it would say Concord will not buy diesel school buses, and we will only buy electric school buses going forward. I know that is not, it's a great ideal in execution, but financially it's not feasible. And
Correct.
So I worked with them to help shepherd this article through to keep us going at a good clip of adoption of these electric vehicles whenever they're financially valuable. That's the origin of this article. As to why the schools aren't presenting it, I think it has to do with the fact that they have a lot going on, and I'm kind of the guy on buses. I see Lori has turned on her screen, so I'm going to let her answer.
Yeah, I think, we had been talking a lot with Brian and really actively engaged in this conversation back this winter. We do have a strong commitment to expanding the electric fleet. The conversation led to a discussion of how to maximize the grant money, because we were only able to get one out of the limited amount of funds last time. So Brian brought a lot of great ideas to us about how to maximize that to potentially get to two. At the same time, the infrastructure issue is valid. So all of that was in the works, and through working with Brian, and actually even through the town leadership, as Brian proposed this is where it evolved to. There was earlier iterations of this article. This felt like a way that was most beneficial both to the goals, but also to the district to continue its progress. And I'll be honest to say, Brian's not wrong that Jared and I wouldn't have had a chance to talk about that at all since March 12th when school closed. So I think we're supportive of Brian's efforts. We definitely want to expand the fleet. And the only way to maximize this next round of grant money would be support to this. So that's the nutshell version. It had some nice progress going, and then the crisis certainly slowed that down, and Brian's energy is why he's still here tonight with you.
I understand his energy. Lori, a follow-on question for you.
Dee, can you wrap it up and let someone else have a question?
I just have one more question. I have one more question,
okay,
which is to Lori, which I remember at one of the meetings, maybe back in February, and Brian had come in, and one of the comments that was made at that time is, if this article didn't pass, that you thought you would have funding for one vehicle yourself.
Well, the grant—
Is that still correct?
The grant has been—
The grant, yeah.
The grant has been $500,000, and the buses are 3-ish. So the math just doesn't equate to be able to do two without some supplemental money. And the infrastructure is going to be an issue, because we're going, right now we're doing it with the areas we have. But to add, any more to the fleet, like Brian described, is going to result in some needs there. So can we get one more from the current grant, the upcoming grant? I would expect we could.
Yeah.
I think you could get one, right?
Correct.
I would say that's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And this slide D is
Yep.
the breakdown of what limited us to one and not maximize the grant last year.
I think I saw Mary's hand up, but I don't have my grid there. Mary, was your hand up? Yep. You're muted.
Out of the $200,000 that you're asking for, how much of that money is that you're asking for now is because you need to take advantage of a VW settlement amount that is time sensitive? So,
Well, all of it. I mean, there.
I thought you said that they wouldn't cover infrastructure.
Correct. That's why I need this to pass.
No, wait. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't ask my question well.
Okay.
So the $200,000 is going to be spent on some things that are going to take advantage of the VW grant and some things that don't take advantage of the VW grant. Is that correct?
No.
It's all for,
So
there's none in there for infrastructure?
So we could capitalize on the grant, but then not be able to operate the vehicles because we don't have the basic infrastructure. So the grant only covers the vehicle purchase and the charger mechanics. It doesn't cover
Great. Okay,
the
and how much is
installation.
that? And how much is that?
The vehicles.
Yeah, and the
we're-
charger.
So let me go back. Let me get, sorry. Let me, oh. Dun, dun, dun. Oop, I've lost Zoom. Sorry.
We can still see you.
Yeah, you can see me, but I'm trying to show a slide. Let's see if we can't.
No.
I got layers of windows and multiple screens. Apologies for the delay here. That one. Do you see the slide with the
Yes.
table?
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to go. This is one vehicle. So if this doesn't pass, we would go back to doing this column here, which is one vehicle, don't maximize the grant, put in a single direction charger, and then we don't get any grid value out of it. That $150,000 is to put in the connection to CMLP, the concrete pads, the tubes, the conduit, so that if we do one bus, we can get that vehicle to grid service out of it. So without that infrastructure, and that $150,000 is a one-time thing. It's like building the diesel fueling station at the depot. It's very equivalent to that. It's a one-time, get it in place, and then once that's in place, we can maximize the grants going forward. But
Thank you.
yeah, and this
Brian, while you have that slide, well, you can use this one. This one's fine.
okay.
Let's talk to this one for 1 second.
This one maximizes the grant with 2 buses. The other
Understood.
one.
Understood. I have a question. Why don't you go to the 2-bus scenario?
Okay.
There you go. Okay. So in the line, grid services,
Yes.
we see that grid services with dual V to G, there's a $294,000 benefit, and that's realized over what time period? How quickly is that realized?
What's also important is the mechanism in which that's realized. So I have a 12-year life cycle is what I'm using.
Okay.
So that would be the value over 12 years for 2 vehicles and 2 PCSs. Now,
Okay.
the savings is found in avoided cost at the light plant for its expenses. So that savings will come back to CMLP ratepayers as lower rates in the future.
So you've calculated that 294 because we have trimmed our maximum usage peak day or whatever. Is that the goal there is to trim that down, and whatever minimal amount we can trim that back, that these buses will trim it back, you can monetize that over 12 years. We get there's a $294,000 savings.
That is,
I just want to understand where the savings is generated. It's generated because we're shaving our peak usage day. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay. So can we go back to the two bus scenario chart again?
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, we're getting there.
We're getting there.
There. One more. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
okay, fine.
there. Sorry.
So as I understand it then, the light plant and the ratepayers, so to speak, are saving $294,000. Have you approached the light plant and said,
Yes.
can you use any of your reserves to fund this so that you will see a benefit stream? And why is that infrastructure not something that they would just happily pay for if all they need to do is pony up $150,000 today to get $294,000 of continuous savings into the future? That's a total win. So why the light plant is not engaged in this is beyond me.
So the light plant has been very helpful in working with me, but this is why I'm going to town meeting. There is no process for me to follow that gets to the correct solution. So that's why I'm a petitioner. So it's the difference between property tax payers and rate payers. And the light plant doesn't buy buses, and the school department doesn't do grid services. And this marries the two for the first time. And so that's why Article 31 is also there, is to help look at these infrastructure needs. So Article 31 is a report to look at these kind of needs around at different buildings so that we can plan them into the town process for this fleet that we're going to have, that we're going to fuel through electricity. That's why that report is so necessary, because we could have forecasted this need for this infrastructure, and we could have had the light plant, the school department, the town manager all at the table when writing the report. So that's why these two articles work together, and I'm very happy to hear we're getting a consultant to solve that issue.
We watched the light plant revolving fund. We watched their budgets. They have substantial reserves at the light plant in unencumbered cash on hand. It's just unthinkable to me that this is not. It pays for itself. The revenue stream is obvious. The light plant should be engaged in the infrastructure component of this. And if the town needs to subsidize getting the maximum value of the grant, so be it. That's fine. But I don't see why the town should dip into a free cash reserve in order to do this. This is that's just me. I'm just speaking my mind.
So Dean,
I just think it's upside down. The way I'm not blaming you. You're trying to push, and you're pushing a rock up a hill, and I get it. But,
Sisyphus.
but it's black and white on this page right here. It's black and white to me.
But this page was developed over arguing with many committees over 5-6 years. It's being first is difficult. And this is a new experience for the town and its process. Staff has done a wonderful job in helping me navigate this as best we can. And the committees have helped me navigate this as best I can. And I have worked very hard to pull all this together. And you're right, hindsight is great. And that's why that report from Article 31 should document that we need a process for that kind of collaboration. In that article, I say we have to look at the motor pool for the DPW, and they will need the same kind of infrastructure. Let's learn from this experience and have the light plant put that infrastructure in. If the staff and town manager and leadership feel that's the appropriate process.
Can I ask a question, Dean?
Yeah. Can I?
I don't know if Stephen, is Stephen Crane still on? Maybe he can answer the question. In other words, does the light plant?
I think it's.
I am.
Does the light plant actually have the authority to buy the infrastructure if it's not directly related to the production of electricity?
They may need an easement.
Well, no. To go back to Dean's point, they do have reserves. They have a rate structure that they're actually in the process of studying now. But how they spend their money is regulated as well, even though it's not necessarily regulated by town meeting.
Right.
And so they don't have like a barrel of cash that they can just go dip a ladle into and spend on stuff. It's all what they can spend their money on is highly regulated as a utility.
Okay, that I think I don't know who regulates it, but maybe that's a longer term solution, because that chart, I think it's a useful chart, but it does mix apples and oranges in terms of sources of funding, because there's two of them there, and then the value, as Dean pointed out, actually accrues not to the taxpayer but to the ratepayers.
Right. Correct.
There's an overlap there certainly, but long-term fix maybe is to let the light plant and maybe even other entities, right, invest in these types of technologies and infrastructure that save them money in the long run.
I fully.
I guess I agree with that for sure. I think that's a good point. I just think, when you have two structures that are both kind of tightly built, Brian articulated very simply. CMLP doesn't buy school buses, and CPS doesn't do grid services. Like, it's just and there's no place for them to even meet in the middle, but for this article. Like, it's funny.
No, it's a great article. I support it if it's creative, etc.
Yeah, I think everybody supports the concept. Yeah. Minimally the concept. I think we all want to see more electric buses.
And I think I would add to that and say, I would like to, when we finish this experience, put that into that report so that we can have a better process as a town, whatever that should be going forward. So I don't have to come to town meeting to ask for funds. I said I don't want to come back to town meeting and ask for funds. That's the infrastructure part. I fully expect that next year, if there isn't some other mechanism found, I may come back next year asking for $50,000, but again, to make sure we don't take education funding away from kids and we maximize the grant from the schools. Yes, Dean, you want to call on Mary or?
Mary, sorry. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm sure my comment just sparked her question.
No, what I'm thinking of is I saw a presentation recently by Kate Hanley to the select board about a report that she published, Sustainable Concord. And in there, she's looking at many different things, but one of the main pillars of this was to electrify both the fleet in the town and to electrify some of the buildings. And I envisioned that out of that report would come a broader plan as far as how to electrify and the infrastructure needed to supply energy to a fleet. And so I'm wondering if this is like an ad hoc thing that should, how does this integrate with a broader plan?
Sure.
So I don't, that's my question.
Okay, so I'm here speaking on my own behalf, but I also am the chair of the Climate Action Advisory Committee, and we were the citizens group to work with Kate Hanley on that climate action and resiliency plan. So that's why you see these concepts in that plan, and that plan is a framework to take from the Concord needs to be more sustainable to here's some definitive priorities and bite-sized pieces of projects to work on. So Article 31 still fits in as one of those implementation steps in the plan. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Tom, are you looking for?
Hey, Brian.
Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hey, Brian. It's Brian. Hey. So can you go back to, there was a map, you don't need to actually pull it up. There was a picture of a map that you were trying to illustrate how the power supply would revert back to the grid, basically. And I guess my question is, as I've been trying to process what you've been saying, I've been trying to understand, or at least analogize this to something that makes sense to me. When CMLP was offering internet service, they were running the lines right up to the property line, and then you had to come up with the cost of, running a line to the street for all intents and purposes. And so when you mentioned this, I was thinking about this in the same sort of way. Is that a fair comparison?
That's very, very much so. So commonly, the light plant will work up to the property boundary, and then it's up to the property owner to come to them.
Okay.
And so the idea that the schools would pay for this infrastructure makes sense. But remember, the depot itself was built by the town, not the schools. So, who should pay for this? You can make an argument for all three entities having a reason why they should pay for it.
The question, which I think everybody's grappling with on some level, is where does this money come from? If we as a finance committee collectively agree, this is a great idea, and we push this forward, the question then fundamentally becomes, where does the money come from? And then who actually has the ability to, who has the authority to actually pony up the cash for all intents and purposes?
That's the core reason that I've left it up to the finance director to do the wording of where the money comes from.
Okay, and so I guess I don't know if this is a question for Stephen or if this is a question for you, but you have this consultant coming online now that's going to do what exactly? Help us understand what.
So we're getting ready to grant to hire our consultants, and hopefully we're successful. It's not huge money, but basically analyze our fleet and identify areas where I assume a schedule for electrification. I mean, you have to bear in mind, and I think Brian would probably disagree with me, there aren't really vehicles that are viable to replace one for one all of the functions that our municipal vehicles do.
Yes, I would disagree with you, but there are cases where there is no replacement. Yeah.
Right. I mean, especially with heavy equipment and stuff like that. I mean, when you're talking about, switching over to hybrid or electrified police cars or staff vehicles, that's easy. And we want to do that. Every opportunity we've had to so far over the last few years, I think we've tried to take advantage of that. But, I don't think they make an electric jetter truck, and that's a vehicle that's out every day. And so I think we just need to, when we say electrify the fleet, if you're talking about cars and pickup trucks, that's doable. When you talk about specialized equipment, it gets a little bit more challenging. And so I think that's where we want to consult to say, what's the landscape look like now? Where's technology coming? And kind of put us on a timeline for adoption.
So Steve, if we vote for this unanimously, what are we voting on exactly? Because no one knows where this money is going to be coming from. So
what's it say?
I'm a little confused.
I'd have to look back to where the article. I thought it was from free cash.
No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't say that anymore.
It says raise and appropriate or transfer.
Well, the rule of the meeting, to just chime in here, the rule of the meeting typically is that it needs to be identified. The source of the funding needs to be identified in the motion.
Right.
So I don't think we can go with this as a motion. This would have to be modified to show exactly where that's coming from. Now,
Is Terry LaFleur on?
I believe she's still.
I am.
Oh, could you speak to, because I let you do the wording. So
Sure. So the wording that is shown in the presentation is what was sufficient for the warrant article. As we prepare the motion, we certainly have to be specific as to the funding source, and the funding sources available at this time would either be free cash or taxation.
So there's no more headroom in the town manager's allocation of debt that was part of the debt plan. We've reduced the debt plan carry this year. This is.
It wouldn't be debt, Dean.
Pardon me?
It wouldn't be debt. It wouldn't be debt.
The debt piece, I think the way this conversation is sort of going is 50 grand is necessary right up front to get this grant. And then there's the infrastructure component of this, which feels like it's got a payback. It has, it's the kind of thing for which debt would be issued or for which funds would be forwarded with the expectation of returns. So that's the piece that I think is kind of rattling around in this conversation that we're having right now.
Well, it's either going to come out of, sorry, Dean, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'm saying it's either going to come out of free cash or we're going to use a portion of levy capacity that is not currently being used by the proposed budget and the other articles.
And if we were to use free cash, how much would that impact free cash? 200 grand, 150,000, right? Not by much, correct?
Right. It's very minimal. Free cash available at this point in time, before we account for any of the warrant articles is almost $12 million.
Yeah, and it would also have a minimal effect on the tax rate.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. This has been very helpful. Great idea.
That was a good question to end on. That was a good question from you. Thank you. Any other?
I can't see any more hands, but I
have one more question.
D.
This is D. Can you put the screen down? Good.
Sorry, it takes a second.
Brian, just one more question, which is, has there been a deadline set for round 2 funding?
Not as of yet. I expect it imminently.
But it has not, you expect it to be announced, but the deadline is generally going to be whatever time frame, right?
COVID has disrupted the cycle.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, we're really actually looking at FY22 starting next month.
Oh, so I've got to. So you're going to the concept of delaying the infrastructure until the buses arrive.
No, I'm going to the concept of delaying the article until April of 2021.
Oh, no, please don't do that.
Well, if round 2 funding hasn't even been announced yet, it generally will be about a year for the funding.
No. We would have to have our ducks in a row to apply. So we need to be able to say that we are ready. We have matching funds in place, ready to go. We can't. That if this article doesn't pass, we can only do 1 bus, and it has to be the AC without vehicle to grid. If this does pass now, we can do 2 buses with vehicle to grid. That's where we are. If there's any delay, it would throw the project into a tailspin. I'm not going to pull this. I would love to be able to not have this discussion during the COVID problem, because I empathize with all of the budget problems that are going on. But this is a very important cog in a bigger machine. If it doesn't pass, it changes the trajectory of the fleet.
One last question, Brian. Once the pipe, the infrastructure, if theoretically the pipe is in the ground, the infrastructure is in the ground, you can deliberate on what type of bus. It doesn't really matter, because you're just, the plug-in doesn't matter. You can make that choice later, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And we, in the pilot that we did with the electric vehicle, the electric school bus, we underestimated the time to install infrastructure for charging, not once, but twice. It led to about 9 months of vehicles sitting idle that couldn't be fueled. It would frustrate me to no end if we didn't learn from our 2 previous mistakes and continued to make that mistake.
We have a hand up. Phil's hand is up.
Hi, so I just wanted to say, to move this along, first of all, this is a great idea. And when the time comes when we're deliberating, I will move that we support this affirmative action on this article for $200,000 to be allocated from free cash.
I second.
And to do that, it's not time to do it yet, but I plan to do that. So maybe that'll help us move this along.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? I don't see any. We do have a few folks standing by, so I'm going to open the floor to the public. Janet Miller, if you'd like to, we'll join you into the group, and you can introduce yourself and make your comment.
Okay, now I've started my video and I've got the audio going.
Yep, you're all set.
Brian, that was a great presentation. My question relates to Article 51, which
identify yourself.
2017.
Janet, you need to introduce yourself and your
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
1647 Main Street. I'm a member of the Comprehensive Sustainability and Energy Committee, but I'm speaking for myself. So, Article 51.
31.
In 2017 set the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from base level of 2008 to 2020 of 20% and 80% by 2050. And I think electrification is a major way of making that possible. So if this does not pass, is there any other way of meeting these goals?
Is that for me?
That's for you, Brian.
So the larger goal of an 80% reduction will take many extraordinary efforts to accomplish over the next few years. This is a very important one, as it's 8% of the municipal emissions. So that fleet is getting this infrastructure in place to allow that fleet to electrify will make a sizable difference in meeting that goal. Will it destroy our ability to get to 80%? No, but we would have to do more difficult choices to get that 1% back that we would get from transitioning the fleet. This would be an easier choice. This is the low-hanging fruit in getting to that goal right now. We're not at the difficult stuff yet. That will take another 10 years, and we'll get some real tough choices.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, we have another attendee. Pamela Dritt, you're waiting in the queue, so we're going to bring you in. And Janet, I think we'll back you out of the group. And there we go. Can you introduce yourself and where you're from?
Hi, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4. I'm very enthusiastic about this. It's one of those things that we actually save money by doing the right thing. We have to make the investment in clean infrastructure the same way we did in dirty fossil fuel infrastructure over the last century. And we can afford to do this. It isn't going to cost us any more money. We can't wait. We just can't wait. It'll be a rolling systemic improvement with all kinds of positive unintended consequences, such as, now my question is gone, but such as the buses themselves being able to act like rolling storage batteries which would allow us to put more residential solar arrays in, which we can't do now because the grid gets maxed out on peak days, which will allow us to have more residential storage, make it even less peak, because every solar installation tends to add electricity that we don't have to buy on the times when it's most expensive, on the hot days.
Okay, thank you. We have a few more people here with their hands up. Terry Ackerman is currently in the queue, and if you could bring Terry in to make her comment, that would be good.
Okay, I'll put this on.
Hi, thank you.
You introduce yourself, Terry.
Oh, I'm Terry Ackerman. I'm a member of the select board, but I'm speaking as an individual. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so I think this sounds like a really great idea. Very good presentation from Brian. And Dean, I thought you made a really good point that, we don't know what the source of funding is, but we know there's a pretty hefty surplus at CMLP. They don't really have a good mechanism financially to use that money for this article. So what I'm wondering is, if this article passes, whether there's a mechanism that we could use legally, like a donation from CMLP to pay back the 200,000 or add it to their pilot, or whatever mechanism we can find to work.
Great idea, Terry. Just find some sort of financial, transfer that would help, underwrite the funding is what you're suggesting. And I think that's an excellent.
So I know no one from the light plant is on right now, but I have been in their meetings where they've done an analysis of their funding, and they do have to have a large surplus for covering 2 to 3 months of their transmission and capacity and generation costs. So I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I also don't want to have people leave this meeting assuming that's a decision, because they would have to be involved. I think going forward, if we could get the report to the Article 31 report to show that value coming back to the light plant, they could probably offer a rebate to the schools so that I wouldn't have to come back and ask for 50,000 to avoid taking from education funding. Maybe that's an output from that report that we could find, and they would be involved in that discussion and tell us why or why not. So there's a good idea there to keep me away from being a petitioner in the future.
Yeah, I don't think, if I can, Dean and Stephen, first of all, I believe Alice Kaufman is a participant, and she is on the light plant board, or not participant, a attendee. But I think the short of it is, as I said already, their rates are regulated and structured, and they are in the middle of studying all of that, and they've had their reserves analyzed against what best practices for utilities, and I know that study is actually, I'll probably learn more about it tomorrow morning, but I know the study is forthcoming. But it's one of those things where maybe in future policy making, I could see the light plant board looking at pilot contributions being set aside for things like this. But in terms of like Article 30 passes, let's go to the light plant and they'll give us the money back. I don't think that's in the cards.
Okay. Well, Alice is in the queue, so we can bring Alice in. I think you have a question, Alice. So why don't we bring Alice Kaufman into the group up to the microphone to ask her question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi there. So my question was, Brian probably knows the answer to this, and I don't. When we purchased the first and our only electric bus, it was supposed to have had a V2G hookup at the solar plant at WR Grace. And I'm curious to know, did that get installed? If not, what were the problems with getting it installed? And then how do we sway the economics of a decision based on that project? And was it Light Plant paying for the V2G hookup to that?
No. So you described it great. It was a hiccup. So
hiccup in the hookup.
Yeah. So the pilot had aspirational goals to do vehicle to grid then. And the proposals we received, they stated that they would be able to do vehicle to grid at a much lower amperage than what is proposed today. When we did the pilot, we found that yes, they had the hardware for the electric vehicle, and that was operating well, but their software still had many bugs. We were the first town in all of the continental U.S. to receive one of these buses in the U.S. So I think our production number is like 25. It's almost a beta vehicle. So they weren't ready, is the short answer, at that time to do vehicle to grid. And so we didn't spend money on a CCS plug for that vehicle to do the higher amperage. And we kind of looked at that concept and said, it's too much to ask in this pilot. That has changed. So nationally, there are multiple vehicle to grid pilots going on with school buses, with other kinds of vehicles. And that industry has really blossomed. And for example, in one of my slides, Dominion Energy, which is a utility in Virginia, has said that they are going to buy 50 of these buses, put them on the road, and they're going to buy another 1,000, and they're going to get to 100% of the school districts in their territory, which is something like 3,000 buses, are all going to be electric. They're all going to do the vehicle to grid services by 2030. So the industry has matured since the last 5 years. And I have more confidence that these buses will do vehicle to grid. The first one, we can ask about getting it retrofit after they show us that they can do it with one of their newer buses. Does that answer?
It does. I think what I'm hearing, though, that this is still a demonstration project. It's not scalable. And it sounds like maybe there are unspent funds from the first V2G project that were not expended for the installation of the software or the hardware to make it work. Are those funds still available? I should know that. I'm on the light board, but I don't know that.
Oh, no, the funds came from the state. And in fact, the electric school bus, other than, consulting with the light plant, I don't think the light plant had any funding in that. So there are the money came 100% reimbursement for the vehicle, 100% reimbursement for the charging unit. But it was one direction AC, a smaller amperage. And then the cost of the depot was under construction. So the schools in that project, I think they upgraded the panel for the depot building and put the conduit in the ground before they laid the asphalt because they were in the middle of construction. So that's where the funds came from. That funding from the state is gone. The pilot has ended. There's no money there. We have the bus we have today. We can talk to Lion, and I think I have a quote from them to do vehicle to grid with that vehicle, but it's not something I'm pursuing at this point because I'd rather get a demonstration of a purpose-built vehicle doing the vehicle to grid and working with the utility, and have that as sometime in the future we may upgrade that vehicle to match the existing equipment.
Okay, we have two more people stacked up. We've
Sorry.
been at this for quite a while. I don't want people to be shorted, so we just let's kind of keep moving along here. So I see Linda Newman is now waiting, and I'm going to promote her into the group to speak. Ms. Newman, introduce yourself, please, and then ask your question.
Hi, Linda Neiman, 59 Mallard Drive. I want to thank Brian for all of his tireless work on this article. It's really appreciated. I'm a mother of 2 elementary school kids, and I really, want this article to pass as an investment in my kids' future. We talk about the expenses of this and how it benefits the entire town. It's in line with the Article 51 from 2017 to reduce the town's greenhouse gas emissions, which a big chunk comes from transportation. So we have to address this sooner or later. And financially, it makes sense to address it earlier rather than later. And also, for the health reasons and climate reasons. The other thing I wanted to bring up is we talk about the cost and the numbers of the bus and all that, but we haven't really talked except in passing about the health benefits of having clean air and the kids riding a clean bus. Because the kids are the ones that are the most at risk because they ride the bus, and as a result, they have a higher respiration rate because they're younger, they have smaller bodies, and the kids sitting on the bus end up breathing more of the pollutants from the bus. And so as a mother, I would prefer either A, they bike to school, which I would like them to do right now, or have the option of riding an electric bus, which there's only one out there right now. And that's pretty much all I have to say. I know it's really late and my kids are wanting to go to bed. They keep pounding on the door. So I'm going to turn myself off.
All right, thank you. All right, we have one more of our visitors here. Wally, are you still waiting to speak? I thought I saw your hand up.
I am still here. I just wanted to make a comment. I thank Brian for doing all this work. And, there's no doubt the benefit of electric buses to the kids. And I think, I look at this sort of as an opportunity to prove the economics. This VW money is not going to be around for very long. We've got a lot of buses. If we're going to try to transition the fleet, we need to prove the economics. There'll be plenty of opportunity for the light plant to get in the mix of this. If we are truly going to be moving toward an electric bus fleet, because schools aren't going to be able to bite off this cost in the budget for various reasons. And so seems like the most likely place for a program to help fund those buses down the road is going to be some partnership with the light plant. And listening to Stephen earlier, I think if we try to wait too long to get some buy-in from the light plant, we may miss the VW money. So I'd hate to see that because this is maybe the thing we ought to do if we miss that is put the 200 grand in Lion or Bluebird stock and wait for Dominion to buy 3,000 buses. So I hope you guys can find a way to move forward on this, identify a funding source. So, we can take another step on this path toward electric buses. Thanks.
Thanks, Wally. Seeing no further questions, I think I'm ready to close the hearing. There are no more articles to be discussed on the hearing. So could I have
I'm sorry, Dean, could I just say thank you very much for spending so much time and allowing the citizens to hear this article and what's behind it. I really appreciate it. I know we're running late, so I want to say thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's part of the public process, so welcome to the party. Okay, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So I'm looking for a motion to close the public hearing so that we can move on and we will continue our finance committee as a meeting. The hearing is being contained within our finance committee meeting this evening, and we will continue to deliberate on our recommendations on these articles. So if you want to hang around and
Move, we close the hearing.
Yep. Second. There it is. Brian Taylor is the second. Okay, I'm going to call the roll. Ms. Ortner?
Yes.
And myself, Dean, yes. Mr. Swain?
Sorry, yes.
Yes. Mr. Rubenstein?
Yes.
Mr. Tarpey?
Yes.
Ms. Hartman?
Yes.
Mr. Guariello?
Yes.
Mr. Patel?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Mr. Jameson?
Yes.
Mr. Hickling?
Yes.
Ms. Zoll?
Yes.
It is unanimous. The hearing has been closed.